Chapter 18 The Thorn Stuck in My Side, Part 2. The three mares were completely silent. Whether it was confusion or lack of words that held their tongue, I couldn't tell. But the silence was becoming heavy and uncomfortable. I tried to make myself as small as possible, wishing I could become invisible or suddenly disappear to a place other than this. I didn't speak a single word. I hardly breathed for fear of attracting any unwanted attention. The floor suddenly became very interesting to me. Applejack was the first to speak up. Beg pardon?" she asked, genuinely confused. "It sounded like you said that them wolves wanted Hunter." "That is what I said," Princess Luna deadpanned. A few fatal seconds ticked by as everyone let the news settle in. It was silent. Dead silent. Applejack, Fluttershy, and the Prince were visibly trying not to look directly at me, as if doing so would give them some fatal illness. Not a single soul dared to break the silence until the farm pony sighed. I was afraid I heard that right. "So what do we do?" Fluttershy piped up. "We have to save the hostages," Charlotte responded almost immediately. "I mean, the vast majority of them are just fools. Not to mention Pinkie Pie and Rainbow Dash are with them too. We can't just abandon them." I didn't glare at her for her response, but I was very close to doing so. I knew from the start which side she'd take, but for the first time I could see her reasoning behind her malcontent towards me. Her friends were being held captive, and the only way she could safely return them was by trading me. The friction between us was just extra incentive for her to get rid of me. "What about Hunter here?" Applejack retaliated. "We can't just give him away like he's nothing." She turned to the princess. "What do you think we should do?" "I do not know," Luna sighed. She sat down and rubbed her temples. "I have already attempted to reach a compromise that would spare any more blood from being shed, but, alas, no such agreement could be reached. Even worse, it didn't sound as if they were treating their hostages in the most luxurious of ways. I fear that no matter which option we choose, the results will be rather unpleasant." Her last thought hung in the air, seeming to chill the atmosphere with its macabre innuendo. I couldn't have agreed more with her, though. It was morbid to think of, but I couldn't think of any way that this situation could end without death. "This ain't fair," Applejack grumbled. "How the hay are we supposed to choose between our friends?" "I'm not pleased with the situation either, Applejack," Luna said, "but we have to deal with it nevertheless." She turned her attention to me. "You have not spoken much, Hunter. What do you have to say? It would be unfair of us to make the decision of this magnitude if you did not speak your mind." I shook my head lazily. I was busy fighting a futile battle in my head, desperately searching for some detail that we might have overlooked that could give us the upper hand. But everything I thought of literally led to a dead end. With each failed scenario, I became more and more agitated towards the situation. I don't know what to say. This is all have to process for me. Because it's not as if the lives of a dozen fools rest with the decision we make, or mine for that matter, I thought as a side note. "But, Princess Luna, surely there has to be a way where we can save all of our friends?" Fluttershy said. Her voice was nearing desperation. "Can't we rescue them right now so that we don't have to give up Hunter?" "I would be lying if I said we could," Luna responded flatly. "The bulk of my night guards are stationed here, and I have no way of contacting the others at the moment. I cannot dispatch any of my guards to retrieve the hostages either. Not only do we not know where they are being held, but if the Timberwolves see any of my guards leave to the Everfree Forest, they will undoubtedly know what we are planning, and beat us to the hostages." She planted a hoof on my shoulder. It was difficult to tell how to interpret the physical contact, but I was sure that if she had fingers, they would be firmly grasping me, probably to give me an extra anchor in the real world, or to pull me out of whatever thoughts I might have drifted to. She was staring directly into my eyes, conveying the full weight of the situation to me as if I didn't already know what was at stake. "I know that this is a lot to ask of you, Hunter. And if it is within my power, I would not be forcing a decision as consequential as this on any pony's shoulders. But unfortunately, It is not, and we need an answer now. Luna glanced up at the 3 watching mirrors before continuing. It will give you some time to think. I shall fetch a nurse to aid you. It would be wise of you to rest. Come, girls, she said, directing her attention to Applejack, Fluttershy, and Twilight. Let us give our friends some space. I watched in silence as the 4 mares walked by. Most of them tried not to look directly at me, but Fluttershy flashed me a reassuring smile as she walked by. It did little to quell my panicking mind, but I tried to at least appear calm for her sake. The weight of the situation finally overwhelmed me. I laid back down in exhaustion, eyes closed and mind racing. The situation was deteriorating quickly, and I feared that the results would not be in my favor. With Twilight as one of the judges of my fate, I had a sick feeling in my stomach that it was only a matter of time before she would justify getting rid of me. I'm too young to be worrying about this, I grumbled. Well, 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 look who we have here, a familiar voice mused. I reopened my eyes and tilted my head in the direction of the noise, to find an even more familiar white and pink nurse pony trotting out to me. Her light blue eyes were locked onto mine. It has barely been 1 week since you personally checked yourself out of the hospital. Barely 1 week since you left me all alone on the top floor with a concussion and a lot of explaining as to why I was up there in the first place. And now, barely 1 week after leaving the hospital, you already need medical attention. I could feel myself shrinking away under Red Heart's gaze. It was nearly impossible to decipher her expression, though it seemed as if she was leaning more towards the disapproving glare. My face heated up in embarrassment as I recalled how I had unceremoniously abandoned her after she had so graciously done me a favor. The tension in the air was becoming so high-strung that it was threatening to snap, until a small half-smile formed on her face. What am I going to do with you? Red Heart chuckled. I released the breath I was subconsciously holding and laughed at myself. Jeez, Red Heart, for a second I thought you were about to throttle me. I sat back up and used my arms to prop my body to be more at eye level with her. Sorry about that, by the way. The nurse waved off my apology with a hoof. Don't worry about it. No permanent damage has been done. But next time, warn me before you hit me in the back of the head with a frying pan, alright? She pulled out a white box with a red cross plastered on the sides. Speaking of damage, she continued, I was told you needed some help. Let's see what I can do. Eager to finally be relieved of the thorns buried in my calf, I rolled up my right pant leg to reveal the crimson-stained sleeves that I amateurishly used to stop the bleeding. Nurse got to work almost immediately, removing the blood-stained sleeves and examining the wound. I winced at the sight of my leg. It was horribly swollen, and coagulated blood dominated the areas around the bite punctures. The nurse, however, appeared completely unfazed. I could only assume that she was accustomed to seeing sights such as this, so I leaned back and tried to relax as she worked her magic. She made the remaining teeth her priority and pulled out a pair of tweezers and a few clean cloths. I tried to resist the urge to scream as Red Heart pried the thorns out of my skin one by one. She wasn't very merciful about it either. Hers was quick, ripping the teeth out with professional ease and then swiftly applying pressure to the newly bleeding wound with a sterile cloth. Eventually, she gave me a rag to bite down on upon my request to turn on my pen as she carried on with the tedious task. You are either the luckiest human alive or the most unfortunate, Nurse Red Heart concluded as she began sterilizing the wound. I'm surprised you made it here with this leg. Well, I did have a little motivation, I pointed out. My eyes were glued to the gruesome side of my leg. Red Heart had done a thorough job of cleaning it up so far, and I had full confidence in her abilities. She was, after all, a nurse, but I was still uncomfortable with the amount of red I was seeing. Am I going to be alright? I asked uneasily. Well, that depends on your definition of alright, she answered. If you're asking if you'll be able to walk again, then yes, you're perfectly fine by pony standards. However, I'm afraid that this wound is quite severe. It might even get infected if not treated. But I'm afraid I'm no expert with human anatomy. For all I know, this sort of injury could be minor by human standards. Even still, I'd recommend you not walk on for a couple of days at least. I nodded. Alright, I'll keep that in mind. This was better than I had originally anticipated. True, my condition wasn't something to just brush off, but I would rather take that than the radical ideas my mind was conceiving. Aside from the dull ache of my leg, this was, oddly enough, nice. As Nurse Redheart tended to my wounds, we managed to keep a small conversation going. I took comfort in our small talk, as it was almost enough for me to forget what was waiting for me outside. Almost enough, but not quite. Every now and then I'd be inadvertently reminded of the situation, and the heavy weight would crash down upon me again. By the time the nurse began wrapping the bandages around my leg, I was back to my nervous state from when Luna and the 3 others were discussing my fate in front of me. I only jumped 3 feet in the air when Twilight cleared her throat behind me. Hello, Nurse Redheart, Twilight greeted. I twisted my torso around, trying to keep my legs out to where Nurse Redheart could still mend them, and found Twilight, Applejack, and Fluttershy. The farm pony and caretaker were standing idly behind Twilight, the former staring straight ahead with a disgruntled look on her face, and the latter hung her head low. Her teal eyes were darting to me occasionally for half a second before falling back down to the floor. Twilight acknowledged me with a slight nod and an indifferent gaze. Hunter, she added. Hello, Twilight, Redheart said. Is there anything I can help you with? Actually, there is, Twilight answered. What is Hunter's condition? To say that her question caught me off guard would have been an understatement. Given our history, Twilight was the last pony I would have expected to care for my well-being. If anything, it would have made more sense for Fluttershy or Applejack to ask that question. Something inside me told me that Twilight didn't gain a sudden sense of sympathy towards me during her absence, either. Oh. Redheart seemed equally confused on the matter. Well, I'll tell you what I told Hunter, she said. He has a rather large wound on his leg, but other than that he seems perfectly fine. I didn't get a chance to check under the bandages on his face, but I'll just trust that Fluttershy knew what she was. But will he be able to walk? Twilight cut in. The nurse blinked. Twilight, I don't think you understand, she said with a disbelieving chuckle. Hunter needs to rest. If he isn't treated soon enough, this leg might become infected. Yeah, let's not let that happen, I timidly added. I kinda like my leg. Twilight shot me a look, and then continued. Look, we only need him for 10, 15, maybe 20 minutes. After that, this whole situation should be resolved, and they can treat his wounds in a more sterile environment. But none of that can happen if we don't have Hunter. She paused to let that little detail settle. So is he able to walk? She asked again. Redheart cast me a curious glance. I'm not sure. I'm not well acquainted with the human anatomy, so I can't tell. Hunter, on the other hand... Hold on a minute, I interjected. Does anyone want to tell the confused human what's going on? Because he would really like that. Twilight thinks she's found a way to resolve our problems, Applejack said. But if you ask me, it's too risky. It's the best chance we have, Twilight argued. And you heard Princess Luna, we are running out of time. Besides, it's too late to back out now. The princess is already doing her part. Something told me that this argument had been going on for a while. As interesting as it sounded to hear their points, I figured it would be best to hear the plan for myself. The fact that Twilight came up with the plan unnerved me a bit, especially since she said that I was a key factor. But if it passed through Fluttershy and Applejack somewhat, I figured I didn't have to worry too much about it. Alright, I said. Before this conversation goes any further, I want to hear the plan for myself. If I'm such an important part, I think it's only fair for me to not be left in the dark. The bickering mares ceased and stared at me, both being reluctant to divulge any information, until Applejack nudged Twilight in the side. The purple unicorn took in a deep breath and began to speak. I suppose I should start with what the princess is doing, Twilight started. Right now, Princess Luna is attempting to come to an agreement with the Timberwolves. Apparently they have some sort of pack leader who called this invasion in the first place. Thorn? I suggested. Twilight raised an eyebrow, surprised by my little comment. Yes, actually. How did you know? That's another story, I answered. Continue. The purple mare gave me a skeptical stare. Right, she said, voice lined with uncertainty. As I was saying, Princess Luna is going to see if we can arrange a formal transaction with the Timberwolves. If she is successful and can establish a reasonable trading ground, then we can set up a trap to arrest this Thorn character once he relinquishes the hostages. I chewed on that for a moment. I had to agree with Applejack. This scheme was a bit risky. After seeing Thorn pull off that stunt with the spear in his hand, I didn't know what to expect of him. Luna, on the other hand, seemed to have some history with him, and although she was being rather secretive about it, it meant she might at least know some of his tricks. Who knows? Perhaps with the princess in charge, there might actually be a fair chance at stopping Thorn. There was one detail I was very skeptical about. Although it was never clarified, it was hard to think that it wasn't true. And I take it I'm the bargaining chip? I asked. We won't let anything happen to you, Fluttershy suddenly interjected, her words rushed from her mouth at a frantic pace. I mean, you don't have to if you don't want to, but if you do, we would never let Thorn hurt you. I would never let any of my friends get hurt. The old Pegasus was visibly torn over the matter. Panic filled her teal eyes. Her entire frame was shaking. She was trying to think of some way to keep me and her close friends safe at the same time. Applejack rested a hoof on Fluttershy's shoulder. Calm down now, Sugar Cube. Everything's gonna be just fine. The farm pony redirected her attention to me. Now Pony's making you to make a certain decision. It's all up to you. There's no shame in saying no with all the risks involved. It was nice of Applejack to say that to help me cope with the situation, but it was too late. My mind was already resolved. I was going to hate myself for it later, but I couldn't bring myself to change my mind, especially not after seeing Fluttershy. After taking a deep breath to compose myself, I outstretched my arm toward Redheart. Help me up, I deadpanned. The nurse stared at my hand in disbelief. Come again? Help me up, I reiterated. If I can't at least stand, the plan is a no-go. Redheart was reluctant at first, but she eventually gave in and pulled me out to my feet. My back was still facing Twilight and the other two mares, but I could feel their eyes staring at me. I took the chance to look around the room, more specifically the stage. Wounded stallions and mares littered the wooden floor, some bearing wounds and more severe than others, as doctors and nurses alike rushed to and fro to quell their pains. My eyes drifted off towards the rest of the room, where the other ponies were strewn everywhere, most of them fast asleep and dreaming of who knows what. Foals were curled up next to their parents, who, in return, had them in a lax embrace as they snoozed. They didn't deserve any of this. They were completely innocent. Thorn was after me. These ponies were just unlucky enough to get caught in the crossfire. That alone was enough to motivate me. Something had to be done. Something had to be fixed. I experimentally shifted my weight to my right. My leg wasn't throbbing with pain, but it felt as if it was slowly becoming more and more irritated. Just 15 to 20 minutes, right? I asked as I turned around. Twilight simply nodded in response. Alright, I sighed. Let's get this crazy plan over with before I can talk myself out of it. It didn't take long for the princess to return. She slipped inside the town hall with an absolute silence and strode up to the stage without waking a single pony. Her calm visage was comforting to see during this stressful time, although the news she brought with contrast counteracted the feeling. Apparently, Thorn was very adamant in having the transaction take place within the Everfree Forest. Not nearby, not at the entrance, but within. That complicated this situation immensely. Originally, we were hoping that the trade would take place in Ponyville, where it would be easier to lay a trap. But now Thorn had the home field advantage, and I could smell his trap as if it were a rotting carcass. Unfortunately, we were too desperate to disagree. We left Town Hall in a bit of a rush. The princess and the three other mares were almost at a trotting pace, forcing me to move at a jog to keep up. There was a null sensation from my legs as we weaved through Ponyville, consequent to some pain medication Nurse had already given me before we left, along with the pill that was supposed to help combat any infection that I might catch. Luna had already dispatched some guards to camp near the trading grounds within the forest. They were given explicit instructions to remain hidden until Thorn released the hostages. Once that happened, the princess would give the signal, and the royal guard would subdue Thorn by any means necessary. It sounded perfectly fine on paper, but I knew it wouldn't be that simple. Thorn was a wild card right now, something that shouldn't be taken lightly. But when I caught a glimpse of Luna's cold, steely eyes, it was obvious that going easy on Thorn was the last of her thoughts. We only paused when we passed the last of Ponyville's houses. Before us lay the wide, open space of the park, illuminated by the pale, white glow of the moon. On the opposite side stood the foreboding forest, beckoning us to enter into its deathly darkness. Before we go any further, I would like you to put this on, Luna requested. As she spoke, a small rope levitated next to her, lit up in a blue aura similar to the glow of her horn. I didn't resist as it connected itself to my wrist and bound them together. It would be wise to at least appear as if we were holding up our end of the deal before we betray it. I gave my bindings an experimental tug and found that they were very loose. I could have easily shed the rope if I wanted to. It's not very tight, I commented. Like I said, we wanted to appear as if you have been detained, the princess explained. However, if worst comes to worst, you should be able to slip out of your restraints with ease. Is every pony ready? None of the mares answered, but at the same time, no one said no. Then let us make haste. I do not wish for this to last any longer than it should. Without another word, she set out to the Everfree Forest at a steady pace. Twilight, Applejack, and Fluttershy looked between each other and then followed the princess's lead. I, however, didn't follow immediately. I stared at the Everfree Forest, the very same forest that had once been my safe haven not even 2 weeks ago. Just looking upon its twisted trees sent a chill up my spine, where not even 2 weeks ago the sight would have been rewarded with a sigh of relief. How ironic that now I dreaded stepping foot near that place. One might dare say it was humorous, although laughing was the last thing on my mind. After noticing how far the ponies had traveled without me, I quickly closed the distance between us. I jogged up next to the princess and matched her pace. The forest was still a long distance away, and we weren't moving as fast as we were originally. So, I figured now would have been a good time to ask a question that had been bugging me for a while. So, what's the story between you and Thorn? I asked. Why are you so curious? She asked. I fail to see how such information would be of use to you. Why are you so reluctant to share? I countered. Luna shot me a look. Perhaps that wasn't the best thing to say. Sorry, I apologized. I just want to know who this guy is. He's done so many things to me, from something antagonizing to attempted murder, and I don't even know why. You're the only pony who seems to know who he is. Luna checked behind us to see how close the other mares were following us. They were behind us a few steps, enough for the princess to continue in a whisper without fear of them eavesdropping. That is a rather long and complicated story, she explained. I do not know how he came to be, or what his purpose is. But you knew each other, I said. She nodded her head. Yes, we did. We were close friends, too. It saddens me to see him in this state, and believe me when I say that he was not always like this. He used to be so happy and open to the world. It was a rare day when I found him upset, but now I can't imagine what would have brought such a severe change upon him. Okay, so now I knew something about this guy, albeit it wasn't much. I couldn't deny, though, how bizarre Luna's description of him was. They were complete acronyms from what I could have used to describe him now. Luna was certainly right about one thing. It was hard to imagine how he could have changed so dramatically. I honestly didn't even know that he was still alive, the princess continued. It has been over 1,000 years since I had last seen him. I had feared he had passed away in solitude, but when I saw this attack, run by timber wolves, there was no doubt in my mind that Thorn was behind it. Well, back up a minute. 1,000 years? I stared at the old princess and tried to size her up. She didn't look a day over 40 in my book. I was by no means an expert on ponies, but a lifespan of over 1,000 years sounded far-fetched. How old are you? Luna glared at me as if I had just said a very vulgar term in the dictionary. It is not polite to ask a mare what her age is, Hunter, she huffed. You would do well to remember that. Sorry, again. This was starting to go nowhere fast. I needed to get this conversation back on track. You said something earlier about him being in isolation. Could you shed some light on that subject? The Everfree Force was growing near. We weren't going to have much time to talk, so I needed to squeeze as much information out as I could. It was not a particularly pleasant time, if I recall, Luna started. I don't suppose the name Star Swirl means anything to you? Star Swirl. Star Swirl. The name did ring a bell, albeit a small one. Where could I have heard it before? It sounds familiar, I admitted. Not sure why, though. I'm not surprised. Most ponies today don't remember his legacy. It would be quite shocking if you did. It is quite sad, actually. He was very well known during his time. The princess's voice trailed off, as if she was lost in thought. But that is beside the point. There was a time, and this was long before Thorn's disappearance, mind you, when Thorn and Star Swirl collaborated on a project. They were researching the true nature of magic and its properties. You should have seen the things they could do, the things they discovered. Luna was getting off track again. She appeared to have completely lost touch with the world around her as she strolled down memory lane. When my sister and I were just fillies, they would visit us every now and then entertain us with new tricks. I cleared my throat to jerk her back into reality. Almost immediately she stumbled in her steps and snapped her toward me, as if I had surprised her. The forest wasn't too far away now. It was only a matter of seconds before we entered. How does this connect? I asked. Princess Luna took in a deep breath. One day, when they arrived at our castle, they were absolutely ecstatic. I was too young to remember at the time to understand what they were saying. I was more curious as to when they would show me a new magic trick. She chuckled as she recalled what I could only assume was her childish ignorance from long ago. Their ecstasy lasted a great many years without dwindling. Unfortunately, I never took the initiative to discover what they were so worked up about, so the nature of their research remained a mystery to me. Then, one day, their experiment reached its climax. They couldn't stop talking about some incredible breakthrough they made. I was much older then, and I paid more heed to what they were saying. They claimed they had discovered a new species, or something monumental along those lines. When they departed, they promised that when they returned, the fate of Equestria would be changed forever. We had long since arrived at the edge of the forest, but instead of entering, we simply stood at the entrance. Twilight, Applejack, and Fluttershy caught up to us and waited. I didn't know how much of Luna's story they had heard, whether they were listening from the start or were hearing it now for the first time, but they were content enough to not interrupt. What happened next? I pressed. Princess Luna was staring into the depths of the Everfree, transfixed by something only she could see. For a minute, I figured I was going to have to ask her again, until she answered. They never came back. At least, not both of them. Thorn arrived alone the next day, bewildered and frantic. Much of that day was a blur to me. The most I remember of that moment was him yelling like a mad pony, rambling on about something went wrong and how Starshaw was missing. There was shouting, a few instances of violence. I recalled Celestia trying to hide us from Thorn's rampage. The last memory I ever had of Thorn was him running out of the front doors, proclaiming that he would make amends to what was wronged. She shifted her head so that she could look me in the eyes. I don't know why Thorn despises you so greatly. Perhaps 1,000 years of grief and solitude has corrupted his mind, and he decided to vent his sorrows upon you. It is impossible to tell, but regardless, he must be stopped before any pony else gets hurt. Now, if all questions are satisfied, let us continue. The moonlight was soon eclipsed by the thick canopy of the forest as we entered, plunging us into near absolute darkness. I had forgotten how difficult it was to navigate through the Ever-3 at night. Thankfully, it was rather easy to follow Princess Luna's starry mane. Something brushed up against my left hand. The contact wasn't abrasive or, thankfully, wooden, but soft and furry like a pony's fur. Regardless of the texture, though, I immediately withdrew my hand and stared down to my side. There was an equine silhouette close to my side, Fluttershy's silhouette to be exact. I could tell from her slightly extended wings. Her fear was radiating off of her shaking form. I relaxed myself, letting my hand fall back down to my side, taking comfort in her presence. I nearly ran into Princess Luna as we came to an abrupt stop. By now, my eyes had somewhat adjusted to the dark environment. I could make out the shapes of some of the shrubs and trees. A sphere of light ignited from the princess's horn and floated just above our heads, bathing the vicinity in white light. "Are we in the right spot?" I asked. Thorn was nowhere in sight, nor were the hostages. There weren't even any timber wolves, just trees. Oddly enough, I found the lack of their presence more nerve-wracking. My answer came in the form of a growl. Up ahead of us, 3 pairs of sickly yellow eyes glowed in the night. Their owners were just outside of the light's reach. We tensed up as 3 timber wolves slunk closer with a wooden cage filled with foals in tow. The one in the middle was much larger than his companions, who were dragging the cage across the dirt path with vines connected to their backs. It came to no surprise to me when the large timber wolf's rim started convulsing. That wasn't to say I wasn't intimidated when his canine form slowly shifted into an 8-foot-tall humanoid one. As the twisted mass of gnarled branches and twisted vines finally settled, Thorn's ancient, rigid form stood, glaring in my direction with a revolted look on his face. "The human," he demanded with an outstretched arm. Princess Luna stirred her ground before me, wings flared out defensively. "Release your hostages first," she retaliated. "Show us that they are unharmed." Silence descended upon the scene. Thorn eyed our party suspiciously, calculating his situation in his wooden head. His stance suddenly became lax. "Very well," he said. He raised a wooden hand and snapped his fingers. Immediately, the 2 other timber wolves dragged the cage closer to us. Roughly half a dozen foals were huddled together in the middle of their crudely constructed container. They were still in their costumes, and their eyes were tear-stained and bloodshot, but other than that, they were completely unharmed. Something was wrong, though. Not only were there not nearly enough foals to match those missing, but there wasn't a single pink pony or prismatic Pegasus in their midst either. The door to the cage magically opened. Seeing their shot at freedom, the foals stormed out and rushed behind us, where they congregated in another type huddle and began to chorus out sniffs and quiet sobs. The wolves retreated back to Thorn and shed the vines that tethered them to the now useless cage. "Now, I repeat," Thorn announced, "give me the human." "Where are the others?" I asked. It was an involuntary outburst. The question bounced around in my head so much it just seemed to fall out of my mouth without me meaning to ask it. No one could deny that the number of hostages were severely lacking. There had to be at least twice as many. I know there were others, I continued. There was no sense in stopping now. I had already asked the question. The only thing I could do now was keep it going. There were 2 mares, too. All I see are foals. Where are they? Thorn's natural scowl deepened. I can assure you that they are perfectly safe. I am simply being cautious. As soon as I have the human, the remainder of the hostages shall be released. This wasn't part of the plan. This wasn't part of the plan at all. What were we going to do? We hadn't anticipated for Thorn to make this kind of move. Now he had the upper hand, and we had no logical reason to deny him without giving up our act. I looked at the princess in hopes that she would have a quick answer, but unfortunately it seemed as if she wasn't prepared for this either. No, she finally said, her head shaking in disbelief. No, that was not what we'd agreed upon. Relinquish all of the hostages first. You are being quite defensive, Luna, Thorn commented. You know what I must do once I have him. I don't see why you are being so protective of a creature that you are planning to give to me. Just then, a 4th winged creature emerged from one of the bushes to the left of the trail and crept into the light, another timber wolf. Its eyes were glued to us, accusing as it drew closer to Thorn. A deep growl emitted from its throat, an incomprehensible noise that resembled scratching wood. But Thorn seemed to take its meaningless snarl into deep thought. A sudden realization fell upon him, and he smiled. Unless if you were not planning to surrender him originally. Thorn surveyed us with an amused and calculating eye. Princess Luna took a step back, trying to hide more of my body from his view. Something brushed up against my leg, and I looked down. I saw Fluttershy shrinking away from the timber wolves behind me. I glanced to the right and found Twilight and Appleduck standing a few feet away. The former bowing her head slightly so that her horn was more aligned with Thorn. The tall timberman's eyes lifted up into the trees and narrowed. The smug smile still dominated his face. I desperately wished that something would wipe it off of his face, but much to my despair, it only grew. Then he raised his wooden hand and clapped, slowly, in mock applause. I shall admit that I did not expect this, he announced, and from Princess Luna, too. I had anticipated that you would have been more honorable with your word. But I suppose time can change even the noblest of ponies. His arms folded across his chest. But now the question is, now that I know your game, what is your next move? Luna held her ground for a moment, then finally relaxed. Her wings folded back against her body. She recomposed herself from her defensive stance. Guards! She shouted. Immediately the woods erupted into motion as night guards made their presence known. 6 armor-clad Pegasi shot out of the trees and landed heavily along the edges of the dirt path. Wings flared out aggressively. 4 unicorns leaped out of the bushes behind Thorn with charging horns, cutting off his escape route. 2 earth ponies armed with lances rushed up to our sides. Thorn was trapped from all sides. There was not a single path he could take without taking on at least 2 guards. And yet, despite being trapped, despite being outnumbered by 3 to 1 by guards, despite all the odds being against him, his smug smile still remained. You should take these fools back to Ponyville, Luna ordered. The 2 earth ponies on our sides relaxed partially. One of them turned and said to the princess, Are you sure, your highness? Yes, Luna nodded. I fear that the situation will soon become too hazardous for ponies for their age. The 2 guards were reluctant at first, but they followed their command and fell back to the town with the fools in tow. The princess focused her attention back to Thorn and raised her voice once more. Thorn, I shall give you one last chance. Surrender the hostages and yourself so that no more blood must be shed. Please, as your friend, I am begging you to come with us. End this madness right now and everything can go back to the way it used to be. For the first time since I had met him, Thorn looked uncertain. He looked around at his surroundings, as if he had just awoken from a trance. I couldn't read his face, but I could tell that he was no longer as comfortable as he was a few seconds ago. He glanced down at the 3 timber wolves at his feet, each crouched down low with their backs towards him, ready to pounce and snarling. His shoulders slouched slightly, but when he looked back up to us, surrender was not in his eyes. "I am afraid I cannot do that," he said. "For over 1,000 years I have kept my word and guarded that portal. Only once have I failed my duty, and I have full intentions of rectifying the situation." The frames of his arms started shifting. Nothing came out of them, though, yet at least, but the sight still made me uncomfortable. "And so I shall give you one last chance," Thorn continued. "Give me the human, and we can all go our separate ways." "There is no need for you to take his life. Hunter has committed no crime worthy of such a penalty," Luna argued. "Just surrender yourself, Thorn. You are outnumbered and outmatched. You cannot hope to win this fight." Thorn's wooden mouth contorted into a twisted smile. "That is what you think." He lifted his hand into the air, his middle finger connected to his thumb, and snapped. The sound resonated throughout the still woods like a gunshot. There was this moment of silence, and then the howling started. All around us, the malevolent chorus of timber wolves filled the atmosphere. It sounded like there were so many of them. I whirled around in hopes of pinpointing just where they were, but the dark silhouettes of the greenery surrounding us hid them from sight until pairs of bright yellow eyes began spawning everywhere. They were constantly shifting within the shadows, making them impossible to count. One thing was certain, though. The tables had turned and the odds were no longer in our favor. "Guards!" Princess Luna shouted. Her voice was filled with fury. "Subdue Thorn at once!" She whipped around to face us. Her eyes were filled with an intense fear and anger. "You four, retreat back to Ponyville now while you still have the chance. It is no longer safe here." She didn't have to tell us twice. The 3 mares and I bolted from the scene back in the town's direction. Already the howling was being replaced by a mad mixture of snarls and barking. I didn't look back for fear of what I might discover. From the shouts and cries of guards and timberwolves alike, it did not sound like it was very pretty. Twilight conjured up a bright ball of purple light to illuminate our paths as we raced to safety. I could have sworn that some of the barking was getting louder, and worried the twilight's light was becoming a beacon for our enemies to follow. I never voiced my concern, though, seeing that my breath should be saved solely for running at the moment. After we were certain that there weren't any timber wolves following us, we gave ourselves a chance to stop and catch our breath. The exit couldn't have been too far away now, right, just a few more minutes walking distance. I was hunched over, hands on knees, panting like a dog from the exercise. "Heavens to Betsy!" Applejack breathed. "What the hell was that thing? I never seen anything like that before in my life." "That was Thorn," Twilight said, but her tone made it sound more like a question. "The princess told us everything about him at the town hall. But when she described him, I never would have guessed that we would be dealing with that." "I told you it was too risky," Applejack muttered under her breath. "We all knew it was risky," I pointed out. "And knowing the risks, we took our chances anyways. What's done is done. Now's not the time to be pointing fingers." We were silent for a minute until a soft voice squeaked. "I hope Pinkie Pie and Rainbow Dash are okay." I shot a glance at Fluttershy's direction. The little Pegasus was breathing heavily. Her body was expanding and shrinking with every inhale and exhale. Her head was dropped low, and her hair covered her face from the rest of us. Her 2 wings followed her head's lead and hung lazily by her sides, her feathers barely brushing against the ground. Out of the 4 of us, she seemed to be taking this the worst. I couldn't imagine what was going through her head right now. She was so close to reuniting with her missing friends, just to have the rug ripped out from under her right when she got her hopes up. Twilight trotted over to the mare and rested a hoof on her shoulder. "I'm sure they're perfectly fine, Fluttershy. The Pegasus didn't seem convinced. "This is Pinkie Pie and Rainbow Dash we're talking about," Tully continued. "With their luck, they're probably both free and trying to find their way back to Ponyville with the other foals." Fluttershy lifted her head up a bit. "Yeah, I guess you're right." A small smile formed on her lips. "Who knows? Maybe they're back home already and Pinkie Pie is waiting to throw us a return party." I couldn't help but smile at the thought of that sight. As the four weary runners emerged from the forest, glum and despaired from recent events, Pinkie Pie jumped in to save the day with her happy-go-lucky nature. Of course, there wasn't a doubt in my mind that things wouldn't turn out that way, but it felt better to jump in on the fantastic illusion at the moment, to take my mind off of what had just happened. Yeah, let's hope that. "Hold on a second," Applejack piped up. The orange mare was standing completely still. Her suspicious green eyes darted left and right. Her ears flicked back and forth. "Did you all hear that?" Now everybody was silent, trying to determine what Applejack could have possibly heard. But so was the forest. Not a single sound was audible, save for the crickets' chirps and the nocturnal birds' hoots. The lack of noise was actually rather disturbing. I would have figured there would have been a larger uproar considering what we just ran away from. And we couldn't have put so much distance between us so that the noise was completely lost in the trees, could we have? A sharp snap cut through the stillness of the night, causing us to nearly jump out of our skins. The four of us quickly congregated in the middle of the path with our backs facing against each other. I believe I could have spoken for everybody if I said we were all on edge. A shadow flashed off to the side, deep within the trees, just on our light's reach. "I think we've overstayed our welcome," I said weakly. "I think you're right," Todd agreed. "Let's get back on track, shall we?" We never had the chance. The growling started before we could even make any more progress towards Ponyville. Two wolves emerged in front of our path between us and our goal, just barely within our light's reach. Their eyes were glowing with hunger. Soon the two pairs of eyes became 3, then 4, then 6. They were deliberately moving slowly, flaunting their control over us. I could have sworn that if they had lips, they would have been smiling maliciously. I took a step back, not wanting to be anywhere near these murderous beasts. But my backward advance was cut short as the wooden growl came behind me, too. I whirled around on the spot to find 3 other timber wolves blocking the rest of the path. Their thorn-like teeth were bared as they inched closer to us. They were crouched low, ready to pounce at any moment. We were trapped. They must have known that. They must have known that they could have ended us with ease. They were toying with us. I just knew it. Why else were they dragging this on longer than it had to be? We were being used as entertainment. The dinner and the show. Savage hunger overcame one of the beasts in a tense step and pounced. I stumbled backward, accidentally tripping over Applejack in the process, and yelped. There was a brilliant flash of purple, and I braced myself for the worst. But all that came was a dull thud. I slowly opened my eyes to a purple sky. For a second, my mind couldn't comprehend what I was seeing. As I lay there, arms held defensively and legs still resting on the back of the pony I toppled over, the entire world was tinted in purple. The stars, the sky, the trees, the moon. Only when more thuds echoed within the enclosed dome that I realized what was going on. I was inside one of Twilight's magical force fields. "Hunter, would you kindly remove your legs from my back?" Applejack asked in a disgruntled tone. I quickly complied and scrambled up to my feet, never taking my eyes off of the purple whirl around me. Twilight's ball of light had disappeared, but the force field she constructed let off its own faint form of luminescence. The dull thuds were accompanied with the muffled barks and yaps of the timber wolves on the other side. They were trying to force themselves inside through any means necessary. Some were attempting to gain access with sheer brute force, tackling the magical bear with their whole body. Others were scratching away with their sharp claws. One wolf was clawing at the earth around the bear, trying to dig its way underneath it. Fluttershy, Hopperjack, and I converged in the middle of the dome next to Twilight, who was visibly struggling to ward off the enemy. Sweat was forming on her brow as she maintained the shield. Each blow the wolves delivered to the shield seemed to have a direct effect on her. She winced every time a wolf collided against the force field. It was then that I realized with dread that this was only a temporary solution. Eventually she would tire out, and then the Timberwolves would be upon us. Right now we were just delaying the inevitable. We needed something to tip the odds in our favor, something that we could use against the Timberwolves that would give us the upper hand, but when I looked around inside our little safe haven, I couldn't find anything but twigs and leaves. There was nothing of use outside of the force field either, at least nothing that was obtainable without getting maimed by the wooden beasts. They had us completely surrounded. I couldn't find any decent-sized gap worth the risk of running through amongst the sea of canine faces barely lit up by the barrier's faint light. Wait, faint light? A thought ran through my head, quickly forming into a plan. It was a crazy plan, but a plan nonetheless. I did a quick 360-degree turn to check my hunch. As I hoped, all of the wolves' eyes were trained directly at us. Even though that was digging at the earth was giving us a hungry stare. One problem solved, I thought. On to the next. Twilight, how bright can you make this force field? I asked. The unicorn's face distorted with pain and discomfort, as a wolf bashed against her shield again. I don't know, she grunted. Do you think you can get it bright enough to blind somebody? I don't know. I've never tried it before. Another wolf tackled the force field, a small violet crack forming on the point of impact, which Twilight quickly mended. Now, if you don't mind, I'm kind of busy at the moment. Just hear me out, I pleaded. I surveyed the wolves again, hoping that they lacked the capacity to understand what I was about to say. I know you won't be able to keep this up forever. You know it too. And the second this force field goes down, we're all as good as dead. As if to prove my point, another crack appeared across the force field. Twilight hastily fixed it, but it was evident that the process was becoming very taxing to the mare. All right, she said. I'm listening. I had to smile at my small victory. There's nothing in here that we can use to defend ourselves once that shield goes down, and I'm afraid that when it does, we won't have enough time to run away. But maybe we don't need a weapon right now. Maybe all we need is a distraction. If you can produce enough life off of this force field to at least stun them for a few seconds, we should have enough time to make a break for it. Twilight shook her head. I'm not sure if I can do that, she replied. Like I said, I've never tried to do anything like that before. I'm not sure if it will work. In fact, the entire force field could fail if I try to do it. It's going to fail one way or another, I pointed out. All that matters is how soon you're willing to let that happen. She looked like she was going to retaliate with some witty remark, but unfortunately her response was cut off as a rather large crack spread out across the force field like a violet spiderweb. Twilight quickly forgot what she was about to say and sealed the crack shut with her magic. I noticed how much slower her repairs were. All right, she resigned. I'll give it a shot. When do you want me to do it? I'll tell you when, I answered. Right now I've got to find an escape route. I searched the ring of wolves surrounding us for any weak link. The bulk of them were still either between us and Ponyville or blocking the other direction of the path. Our safest bet was to go off of the path and into the trees, who would most likely be straying further from Ponyville, but with all of the twists and turns it would be easier to lose the Timberwolves. Besides, after living in these woods for over a month, I should be able to find our way out if we ever got lost. There, off to the side, there's a single Timberwolf blocking a straight shot into the trees. You're smaller than the others. Once blinded, it should be relatively easy to overwhelm if needed. Set aside that we had some chance of escape, I gave Twilight her cue. She took in a deep breath to prepare herself. Her horn ignited in a bright purple aura. Already the barrier's light was becoming stronger. I could hear it humming with energy. Close your eyes, every pony, Twilight warned. It's about to get very bright. I screwed my eyes shut and faced the ground. Through my closed eyes, I could still see the vibrant flash of the force field. It only lasted for a second, but it sounded as if it did the job. A chorus of yelps and barks erupted around us. When I dared to reopen my eyes, I discovered that Twilight, like she said, the force field had failed. All of the timber wolves were slowly backing up, wildly shaking their heads. It worked! The wolves were blinded, even if only temporarily. We would have a small window of opportunity to work with, and we needed to make the most of it. "This way!" I shouted as I quickly skirted around the smaller wolf and entered the trees. I could hear their 3 mares' hooves pounding against the dirt as they followed not too far behind me. After realizing that their prey had run off, the wolves howled in anger and tried to chase us. They were slow to start, though, courtesy of Twilight's blinding light, and I managed to gain a good head start before they could gather any momentum. Navigating through the Everfree Forest at night was never a simple task, and this time was no exception. Silhouettes of branches and vines sprouted out of thin air as we ran, threatening to ensnare us or impede our progress. Every now and then I would stumble over the random root that reached out of the ground, but I always managed to catch myself. I made sure to change our direction whenever I could to try and throw the timberwolves off our trail.
"You won't be able to keep this up for long, Hunter,"
the voice warned.
"You are tired and hungry and still wounded. That is not a good combination for our situation. You need to find shelter so you can rest."
Gee, why didn't I think of that? I snapped mentally. A throbbing pain sparked in the back of my head, nearly causing me to lose my concentration and run straight into a tree. Apparently, my second consciousness didn't like my sarcastic remark. "Okay, I'm sorry," I quickly thought. "Just keep your temper down. You're giving me a headache." My pain reluctantly subsided, but I could still feel a small amount of bitterness in its absence. Look, I'm trying to find us somewhere safe to hide, I thought. You know that. But I don't know where the heck we are. There isn't a single tree in this stupid forest I recognize. And it doesn't exactly help that we have to keep running.
"Listen closely. You're more familiar with this area than you realize."
With nothing to lose other than a few seconds of my life, I slowed my pace down to a jog and strained my ears. At first I couldn't hear anything other than my pounding heartbeat and Twilight, Applejack, and Fluttershy's heavy breathing. But then, a small noise surfaced from the background. It sounded like static? Oh, it couldn't have been that. It had to be something more natural. It was just growing louder as we progressed. It was more like a faint roar, but it was consistent, never ending or changing in tone. The river! If we were close to the river, then that meant we weren't too far away from the castle either. And if we managed to make it to the castle, we would be better able to defend ourselves from the Timberwolves and have more time to think of a better plan for getting back to Ponyville. "Come on," I called back to the mares. "I think I know where we are. There's a safe area close by. Follow me!" Fueled with newfound hope and excitement, I made a beeline towards the sound of the river. The sound grew louder and louder, until finally the river came into view. I collapsed on my hands and knees at the riverbank, exhausted from all of the running. I was sweating profusely, which reacted horribly with the Arctic breeze, but that didn't affect me at the moment. I was too busy smiling triumphantly to worry about any discomforts. "This is a dead end," Twilight breathed. I rose up and on my feet and turned around. Twilight, like Applejack and Fluttershy, was breathing heavily. She had a small frown on her face, and her eyes were staring at me accusingly. "You said you knew where our place of safety was. The riverbed isn't in the least bit safe." I know. We're not there yet," I explained as I walked closer to the river. "But we are close to it. We just have to cross the river first. Trust me." "What makes you so sure this place will keep us safe?" Applejack asked. I couldn't resist the urge to smile at her question. "Because, Applejack, I hid there to stay safe from you." My revelation caught them by surprise. I watched as their expressions changed from ones of shock to curiosity. "And just where is that?" Twilight asked. "You'll find out soon enough," I replied. A long howl pierced the air, accompanied by a series of yaps and barks. They didn't sound too far away. "Let's go before our wooden friends show up." Crossing the river was a relatively easy endeavor. While Twilight supported herself and Applejack across the river with her magic, and Fluttershy was able to fly across, I had to swim. The task was not too hard. After all, I did have plenty of experience with these waters. Unfortunately, the bandage over my face became soggy, and the medical tape holding it in place started peeling off. By the time I emerged from the river at the other side, the gauze was barely dangling behind my face, exposing much of my shredded skin to the world. I couldn't see how all the wounds healed, but from the looks the mares' faces were when they saw it, I assumed it wasn't a pretty picture. By the time we were about to leave, our chasers arrived at the other side of the river and swarmed the river bank. Their numbers had increased slightly. However, it looks as if some of the newcomers were beaten and broken. They were not about to get much sympathy from us, though. We were still the prey in this game of chase, and we weren't about to give them any time to catch up either. It was practically a straight shot to the castle now. It wasn't too long until fragments of the stone fortress peeked through the branches and leaves of the trees around us. My insides were tingling with excitement. Not just from being so close to safety, but from seeing my old home too. It felt like forever since I had last seen it. I was practically beaming when the trees opened up and the castle came into full view. "You've been hiding here?" Twilight asked in bewilderment. "No wonder we could never find you before. I always figured you were somewhere close to the edge of the forest." "Yeah, it's really interesting," I muttered. I marched up to the start of the bridge and rested a hand on the stone pillars that the support ropes were tied to. A breeze rattled the old wooden planks, causing the whole bridge to sway. A quick look over the bridge revealed nothing but fog. I had never put much thought into how deep this chasm could have been. The strange fog obscured its true depth, but there wasn't a doubt in my mind that it was still a long drop. "Come on, we'll just have to cross this bridge and then we'll be safe." I let the 3 mares go before me and waited until they were at least halfway across before I followed. The bridge always had some difficulty supporting my weight. I feared that the combined weight of me and the mares at once would be too much for it. The old planks groaned underneath my feet as I slowly walked across. Even after countless days and nights of walking over this bridge, the fear of plummeting straight through hung over me like a dark cloud. When I took my first step on solid ground, I let out a breath that I was subconsciously holding in. Twilight, Applejack, and Fluttershy were still waiting for me outside of the castle and were more than eager to enter the safe confines of the walls. When we heard the nearby howls, they were only more motivated. I told them to go inside and that I would be joining them shortly. Without giving them any further explanation, I turned around and knelt before one of the 2 stone pillars that connected the bridge to the side. When I heard the heavy front doors of the castle open and close, I began unfastening the ropes. I already had one support beam untied when Twilight's voice spoke up behind me. "What are you doing?" I craned my head back to look and barely saw the purple unicorn within my field of vision. "I'm unfastening the bridge so that it will fall," I explained as I got to work on this rope. "What are you doing?" Why are you doing that?" she inquired. "You're going to trap us here." The knot became loose within my fingers. The rope quickly slipped off the edge as the bridge swung sideways. "That depends on how you look at it," I said. I moved to the next pillar and began untying the support rope. "This bridge is, as far as I know, the only way in and out of this castle. Everything else is nothing but bottomless chasm. If we take this out, then the wolves won't be able to get any closer to us. I'm not just sealing this in, I'm sealing them out too." "But how are we going to get back to Ponyville?" Twilight demanded. "Simple. When the time is right, either you can grab the end of the bridge and manage to bring it back up, or Fluttershy can swoop down and do it herself. 3 ropes down, 1 more to go. I know it's a lot to ask, but I need you to trust me, Twilight. I'm trying to help." There was a small moment of silence, and then, "All right, I'm trusting you, but for your sake, you better know what you're doing." I listened as her hooves trotted against the dirt as she walked into the castle and shut the door behind her. Never thought I'd hear her say that, I mused. The last knot was much harder to undo. All the weight on the bridge was unloaded upon it, and the resulting stress in the rope caused it to tighten itself. I grabbed a nearby sharp rock and began cutting away at it. Soon the rope was severed, and the entire bridge collapsed to the other side, creating a loud crash as it struck the other side. Coincidentally, the Timberwolves emerged from the forest at that moment. They were clearly angry about the lack of any bridge and went to no trouble voicing their opinions. I stood up with a triumphant smile as they vainly attempted to intimidate with barks and howls from across a large distance. But my smile was soon wiped off my face as a tall, slim figure appeared behind them. That's impossible, I breathed, and yet he was still there. A golden sap was slowly oozing from the left side of his face. He appeared to be hunched over, and his arm was wrapped around his torso to conceal a rather large-looking wound. Regardless of his wounds, though, he stared directly at me with enough intensity to prove that he was far from exhausted. "Why can't this guy take a hint and give up?" I growled. Thorn put his arms down to his side and straightened his posture. From my distance, I could see the frame of his arm shifting and convulsing as the long spear began to push its way out of his wrist. I rushed to the front doors of the castle and pushed through them with more force than necessary. When I turned around to check behind me, Thorn had his spear fully mounted and was already pulling back to throw it. There wasn't much time left. I grabbed the open doors and slammed them shut. Then I grabbed whatever loose vine I could and tied the handles together. When I finished, I took a few steps back and stared at the wall in anticipation. "Is something wrong, Hunter?" Fluttershy asked. I glanced behind me for only a second to find her directing my attention back to the doors. No, it's just a small problem." A spear's head sprouted out of the heavy doors. I leapt back in shock. Or maybe a big one.